You're in the water loop.
Waterloop is a nonprofit media outlet made possible in part by a grant from Spring Point Partners. For all content, visit waterloop.org. This is episode number 147, Measuring the Yellowstone Flood. As an historic flood devastated Yellowstone National Park and downstream communities in Montana, the U.S. Geological Survey was busy measuring stream flows, monitoring equipment, sharing data, and even making repairs in the field. Early data shows the flood could be a 1 in 500-year event, and the gauge just outside the park measured water levels 50% higher than the previous record. The role and response of USGS during these storms is explained in this episode with Katherine Chase, surface water specialist at the USGS Wyoming-Montana Water Science Center. Katherine says that trends show increases in peak flow over the years, a possible indication of how climate change is bringing more intense rainfall and melting snowpack more rapidly in the Yellowstone area. She also discusses how to accurately describe the frequency of flood events and the ways USGS coordinates its science with other federal agencies during events like this. The conversation will begin in 1 minute, but first, a word about our sponsor, Varuna.
Waterloop.
This episode of Waterloop is sponsored by Varuna, the decision intelligence tool for water systems. The factors that go into running water systems are more dynamic than ever, but the tools for making decisions are still static. That's why Varuna built a resilience tool that uncovers blind spots, identifies risks, and generates insights, which are all presented in a user-friendly dashboard. There are many risks that water systems have to mitigate. While EPA identifies 10 vectors of risks that water utilities should track, the Varuna Resilience Tool captures 26, including internal and external risks. The tool allows operators to take immediate actions and leaders to make long-term strategic decisions, and is especially helpful for smaller systems. With Varuna, better data means better decisions. Learn more at varuna.city and let them know you heard about it on Waterloop.
You're in the water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop. This is Travis. I am here with Katherine Chase. She is a surface water specialist for the U.S. Geological Survey out of their Water Science Center for Wyoming and Montana. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I think everybody has seen in the news the just devastating flooding that has taken place in Yellowstone National Park and the area around there. Wanted to talk to a water scientist about, what you see or saw in the streams and the waterways. I know USGS has got just the best monitoring, the best network of monitors and sensors and all that kind of stuff. So what happened out there? You're a resident of the general area. What was the news for people? If you could recap that first.
So we saw record stream flows on many of the stream gauges in the Yellowstone River Basin. And mostly I'm talking about the Yellowstone River that's downstream from the park, so north of the park, where we saw record stream flows, and a pretty rare event for this area. And then record stream flows in many of the tributaries also. And up in the park, we do have data from a few stream gauges there that showed really large floods, as many people have been hearing about.
So as an event like this is happening, you've got this heavy precipitation, big rain, a scientist like yourself and then your colleagues. What's happening at USGS? What data do you have access to? What do people do to get more? Yeah, just what's kind of like the reaction?
So as you noted, we have many stream gauges in the area. We have 3 stream gauges in particular that are downstream from the park that experienced, as I said, large floods, and then also gauges on the tributaries. And what we, noticed on Sunday and Monday is that the flows at those stream gauges were coming up very quickly. And as we were looking at National Weather Service forecasts, as those were being updated, we did know by Sunday and as of Monday that large flows were happening at those stream gauges. So immediately we kick into motion, and our data staff, men and women, are out there checking on the stream gauges and measuring stream flows to confirm what we're seeing at our gauges online.
Couple questions off of that. So you kind of have some advance notice, right? Your gauges are upstream, right, in a lot of cases, and where rain is coming, and you're starting to get a sense that this is all going to come together and lead to bigger flows in like the Yellowstone River and so forth.
Right. So our Corwin Springs stream gauge is upstream from the town of Livingston, for instance. And so once we noted that flows were coming up there, we knew that something was going to be hitting downstream at Livingston, for instance, and we started really watching that gauge. And again, that's when crews were going out to confirm the flows we were seeing online. And then, of course, I get questions from many of my state and federal partners. So the whole time we're communicating with our state and federal partners about, because these data that I'm talking about, everybody sees. It's public information that's on our website. So we get immediate lots of questions from the Weather Service. We are in direct communication constantly with them, and then with other state and federal partners as well.
Oh, wow. So you talk about record levels on these gauges. Could you talk numbers a little bit? Like, how high were these levels? What's maybe the previous highs? What are some of the averages? Just whatever numbers you want to share to put this in context.
Yeah, sure. So as far as the actual discharge data that I'll be talking about, it's all provisional at this point. We have a lot of work to do out in the field to confirm these numbers. As many of your listeners probably know, these large flows will change a channel, right? They scour it out, deposit in some places. So some of these numbers might change as we get out there and understand what really happened at the sites.
Sure.
But for instance, at the Yellowstone River at Corwin Springs, that's the downstream gauge from Yellowstone National Park, the stream flow provisional again is 49,400 CFS. And the largest discharge on record, that gauge has more than 100 years of record. And the largest discharge on record was 32,200 CFS.
Wow. That's like a 50% increase over the highest one before. That's my rough math right there. That's incredible.
And we can compare these observed peak discharges with peak flow frequency analyses that we've published. Again, these data are public. And when we make that comparison, that event is larger than the 0.2% event for that stream gauge.
Incredible. You mentioned that these big events can scour streams, and I think I've even seen stories about, changing the course of the river a little bit and everything. Is any of that science available yet, or is there anything you see in the data that hits at that?
Well, that's why our folks are out there at our stream gauges. They're actively surveying and taking measurements. And just based on some of the information that they're getting right now, they do see scour at some of the sites. That's pretty much as detailed as I understand things right now.
Sure.
But what you'll see, and so we don't publish that geomorphologic data directly, but what you see is, USGS develops a rating curve. So that's a relationship between stage and discharge at our stream gauges. And what you'll see after a channel changes is that shifts. It's called a rating shift. So that relationship changes. And you can see that information on our website.
Wow, interesting. So, you and the rest of your colleagues at USGS have, tracked this data, studied this data on streams and river flows. We hear a lot about maybe some of the precipitation events or lack of it in other parts of the country. Up there in Montana and Wyoming, what kind of trends are you all seeing when it comes to flows in your waterways?
So, right, we do some research on trends in precipitation and temperature and how that might be affecting stream flows. Right now, that's in public. It hasn't been published yet, okay. So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming out soon. But we have published trends for some of these sites, and in the Yellowstone, what we've noted again, we have some nice long periods of record that there are increasing trends for some of these sites on the Yellowstone River. So these are changes in the peak flows.
Yeah, I
Right.
was going to say changes in just the water levels being higher, but you're saying peak flows are getting higher, or there's more intense flows that come from rain events.
Well, specifically, what we're talking about is so we every year we record the annual peak, the highest the peak discharge ever got, and then we do a peak flow frequency analysis on those annual events. And through time, for instance, at the Corwin Springs gauge, those peaks have been increasing. Of course, year to year they go up and down and up and down, but a trends analysis does show that they have been increasing.
Interesting. Could you talk a little bit about, and we talked about this before the podcast, a 50-year event, a 100-year event, a 500-year event? Because I think the public hears some of these phrases from time to time, and they might think, oh, we just had a 100-year event. Well, we're good for another 100 years. Or how is it that we just had two 500-year events in back-to-back years? Or maybe could you explain what that phrase is all about?
Yeah, so isn't statistics fun? I mean, it gets a little complicated, and I get twisted around sometimes when I'm talking about annual exceedance probabilities and the probability of a large event happening. What we do, as I noted before, is we take the highest discharge, the peak discharge every year, and then we compute flood frequencies or peak flow frequencies on those peak flows. And we can come up with, then using statistics, for instance, the 1% event, the event that's expected to occur or be exceeded every year. And I like to call that the 1% flow. And that could be described as the 1 in 100 event too.
Okay.
So lots of people like to refer to that as the 100-year flood, which is correct, but at the same time, it can lead to confusion because, as you noted, people don't understand why, how does that happen 4 times in the last 10 years? Well, that event has the same probability of occurring every single year. So just because you have one doesn't mean you're not going to have another one fairly soon. Now, to say all that, also, we learn about the system every year. So we keep collecting these data. At some point, we'll come back and update those peak flow frequencies, and they might change depending on what's happened.
That makes so much more sense the way you've explained it, that this is like a 1% event, if you will, right? That rather than throwing the years into it, because that's just like changing the percent. That's really what the crux of this is that percent there. Yeah. And so this flow of 49,000 cubic feet or whatever, what percent would that be?
So I'm just comparing it to our published analyses, and it's higher than the 0.2%. That's what we can say right now. It's higher than that 0.2% or 1 in 500 event. So a fairly rare event.
Very rare. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing you mentioned is kind of partnership with other federal agencies, with states, other partners. How does that work during an event like this? Who is USGS kind of in communication with? What are you all sharing and trying to accomplish through those partnerships?
So, one of the most intense partnerships during a flood event is the National Weather Service. We are providing streamflow data. At the same time, they are providing forecasts at these stream gauges. So they're using, as I understand it, they use our data, and they also use their models. So we're always going back and forth about, what are you seeing at this gauge? Is this correct? Because, as I said, these data are provisional, and sometimes, we had one stream gauge where it was attached to a bridge and the bridge washed out. So,
wow.
Yeah, right. So things like that happen. And as I said, the channel changes. And so we're actively working with the National Weather Service and other partners to understand what's going on and communicate that so they know how to interpret our data, because our data are all online. During an event, though, things are changing rapidly. And so we try to stay in communication about that.
Yeah. Okay. That's how, like, I hear on the news, like, this river is predicted to reach flood stage or predicted to crest, right? That's like using some data on what's happening now versus what the meteorology folks say is coming, and then kind of mashing that all up in a model. You love my technical speak here, but that's kind of how they come up with that, right?
So that's perfect. Your
Okay.
technical speak is perfect. That's the way I understand things too. Again, I'm not involved in lots of those direct
Sure.
communications. Um, our data section, and we have a data field chief that is having most of those conversations. I'm on the edges of those, and I'm working on the side that's more interpreting what's going on. So I work with our, again, understanding the frequency of these floods and getting out there and really understanding what changes might be happening.
Sure. And then other partners you work with, I mean, the state, they're probably looking for information for safety reasons and highway response and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, they're actively working with FEMA, for instance.
Mm.
FEMA gets involved quickly during and after a disaster to help those local communities. And our state disaster and emergency services also are out there trying to provide, first of all, trying to do whatever they can to keep people safe. And by the way, it was pretty incredible that during this massive event, I haven't heard, but I don't think many people were injured or so that just speaks to our emergency responders and these communities being organized so that when something like this hit, they were ready. As they could be for something like this.
Yeah, sure.
But yes, so those agencies are out there working with the communities. Again, we're providing what data we can to help them make decisions and respond.
Maybe down the road, as others look at this data, I imagine maybe obviously federal agencies, state agencies are going to look at it and figure out how things should be rebuilt or what concerns there could be for similar events. Maybe environmental organizations and might take a look at this stuff. I mean, I imagine there'll be a lot of debriefing and lessons for the future.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
And again, our role in all that is just to provide as good information we can, and we also do interpretive science. So we can dig deeper into the data and do more analyses and help with those decisions for how to move forward in the future.
Well, last thing I want to ask you, you've mentioned about all this being publicly available. I think there's a lot of water science nerds like me that listen. Where can, I know USGS.gov is your website. Yes, and anywhere, where should people go if they want to dig into this stuff a little bit?
So one of the first places to go is the water dashboard. And I have the website. If you just Googled USGS water dashboard, you would get there.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
And that'll do it. And that's where people can dig into data and see what's happening on gauges and everything.
Yeah, that gives a national overview of the stream gauges across the nation. And you can zoom in to wherever you're interested in and then start digging in by clicking on sites that you're interested in.
All right. I will be sure to waste a lot of my time doing that. I get lost in those things.
You can get lost. Yeah, there's so much information out there. It's interesting.
Well, Katherine, I appreciate you jumping on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Waterloop.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you to this episode's sponsor, Varuna. To find all episodes, sign up for email updates, and connect on social media, visit waterloop.org.
Waterloop, Waterloop, Waterloop.